Hello, boys.
Legend who could make love to half the men and women in Hollywood.
Marlene Dietrich was the kind of woman Hollywood rarely sees. She could walk into a room and make everyone stop breathing. Men wanted her, women wanted her, and the whole world seemed to orbit around her magnetic presence. She was glamorous, mysterious, and untouchable on screen, but behind closed doors, she was fire and passion wrapped in silk. Her life was one of the most dramatic, scandalous, and deeply human stories ever lived, full of love affairs, heartbreak, defiance, and secrets that even her closest friends never fully knew. This is the real story of Marlene Dietrich, and trust us, it is nothing like what you have seen on screen. Before we go any further, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We bring you the real stories behind Hollywood's biggest legends, the ones the studios tried to hide, the ones history almost forgot. You do not want to miss a single one. Marlene Dietrich was born in Berlin in 1902 into a comfortable, well-off family. Life seemed promising at first, but tragedy arrived early. When she was just 5 years old, her father was thrown from a horse and died from his injuries. It was a devastating loss that shook the family deeply and left a wound that never fully healed. Then came World War I, which brought even more instability and uncertainty into their lives. Through all of it, her mother tried to give her something to hold on to, and that something was music. She encouraged Marlene to pursue the violin, and the young girl threw herself into it completely. She was not the type to do anything halfway. She practiced for up to 6 hours a day, pushing herself past the point of exhaustion, repeating difficult pieces over and over again until she could play them perfectly. But perfection came at a brutal price. Over time, the intense physical strain of all that practice began to take a toll on her body. Painful muscle spasms started creeping into her hand and wrist, and no amount of rest seemed to help. When she finally went to see a doctor, the news was crushing. The damage to her wrist was too severe. Her dream of becoming a professional violinist was over before it had truly begun. For most people, that kind of setback would take years to recover from, but Dietrich was not most people. She picked herself up, shifted direction, and stepped into the world of acting, finding her way into German silent cinema, where she quickly began building a reputation as someone worth watching. During those early years in Berlin, Dietrich was living a life that most people of her time would have found completely scandalous. The city, during the Weimar Republic era, was full of energy, creativity, and a kind of freedom that was unlike anywhere else in the world. Dietrich embraced all of it. She became a familiar face at gay bars and extravagant drag balls, moving through those spaces with the same confidence she carried everywhere. She had passionate affairs with both men and women, living with a kind of reckless joy that she never seemed to apologize for. She was young, free, and completely herself, and she made no effort to hide it. Then, in 1924, something changed. She was 22 years old when she met Rudolf Sieber, an assistant film director, and within a short time, the two were married. She later said it was because she was overwhelmingly in love, but the timeline tells a slightly different story. She was almost certainly pregnant when they married, and by December of that same year, she gave birth to their daughter, Maria. For a brief moment, it looked like Dietrich might settle into a conventional life, but that was never going to last. Not long after the marriage, Rudolf fell in love with another woman. What happened next is one of the most astonishing things about Dietrich's life. Instead of breaking down or walking away in anger, she accepted the situation entirely. She welcomed the mistress, offered her gifts, and even allowed her to spend time with Maria. To the outside world, it was incomprehensible, but for Dietrich, it seemed to make a strange kind of sense. This was the beginning of what became one of Hollywood's longest and most unconventional open marriages, a relationship that lasted for decades, despite, or perhaps because of, its complete rejection of traditional rules. Her career, meanwhile, was about to explode. Director Josef von Sternberg was searching for a leading lady for a groundbreaking project called The Blue Angel, which would become Germany's first full-length sound film. When Dietrich showed up for the screen test, she was not expecting much, but her performance stopped everyone in the room cold. Almost overnight, she went from being a known face in German cinema to an international sensation. Paramount Pictures signed her to a deal before the film even reached theaters, on the condition that she moved to Hollywood. She agreed, said goodbye to Rudolph and Maria, and boarded a ship for America, carrying the quiet hope that she would return to them soon. But Hollywood greeted her with something she was not expecting. When her ship docked in New York, there were no celebrations waiting for her. Instead, there were legal papers. Von Sternberg's wife had filed a lawsuit against Dietrich demanding an enormous sum of money, $600,000, claiming that Dietrich had destroyed her marriage by telling the press that von Sternberg was in love with her and planning to leave. For someone who had not yet even appeared in a single American film, it was an extraordinary scandal to walk into. Paramount wanted to settle the case quickly and quietly. Dietrich refused. She was determined to clear her name, and she went to the trouble of tracking down the journalist who had allegedly fabricated the quotes attributed to her. Eventually, the lawsuit was dropped, but the questions lingered. Whether Dietrich and von Sternberg were ever truly romantically involved was something neither of them ever fully confirmed. What was undeniable, though, was the power of their creative connection. Together, they made some of the most stunning films either of them would ever produce. But as Dietrich's star rose higher and higher, von Sternberg's began to fall. And there were those who believed the intensity of their bond had something destructive woven into it. On the set of Morocco, filmed not long after her arrival in America, the drama continued. Dietrich began a passionate affair with her co-star Gary Cooper, which was already a complicated situation, given that Cooper was simultaneously involved with Mexican actress Lupe Velez. Velez was furious. Reports from the time described her as threatening to physically attack Dietrich if she ever got the chance. The tension between the two women was explosive and very public. But even in the middle of all that chaos, Dietrich found a way to make her mark on the film itself. Von Sternberg trusted her creative instincts, which was unusual for someone so new to Hollywood, and she used that trust to push for something bold. In one scene that would become legendary, dressed in a tuxedo, she leaned in and kissed another woman on screen. Censors were outraged. They pushed hard to have the scene removed. Dietrich refused to back down, arguing that the moment was essential to the story. The scene stayed, and it became one of the most talked-about moments in early Hollywood history. Around this time, Rudolph and Maria came to join her in Hollywood, but Dietrich's approach to motherhood was as unconventional as everything else about her. She rarely referred to Maria the way most mothers would, sometimes calling her simply the child, as if she were more of an assistant than a daughter. She pulled Maria out of normal school life and brought her along to film sets, placing her in environments that had nothing to do with a typical childhood. It was a strange and complicated upbringing, one that Maria would later write about in a biography that shocked many readers. As Dietrich's fame grew, Paramount positioned her as the American answer to Greta Garbo, another European actress with a mysterious, distant presence. The comparisons were obvious, from the accents to the cool, almost untouchable quality they both projected on screen. But while Garbo kept mostly to herself, Dietrich seemed to draw people in like a magnet. One of those people was John Gilbert, a man who had once been one of Hollywood's biggest stars, but whose life had been falling apart for years. Personal heartbreak, including being left at the altar by Garbo herself, had sent him into a spiral of heavy drinking and professional failure. Dietrich, to her credit, did not look away. She saw something worth saving in him and made genuine efforts to help. She pushed for him to be cast in one of her films, and she spent quiet time with him, even celebrating Christmas with him and his daughter in an attempt to bring some stability back into his life. But his health kept declining. A series of heart attacks wore him down, and eventually one of them took his life. At his funeral, Dietrich collapsed in the aisle, overcome with grief. Even afterward, she carried guilt, wondering whether the intensity of their relationship had added to the strain on his already fragile heart. She grieved, but she did not stop. She never really stopped. After John Gilbert, there was Douglas Fairbanks Jr., who was 7 years younger than her and still married to Joan Crawford of the time.
Then came a period in the late 1930s when Dietrich had become perhaps the most desired woman in the world, attracting Hollywood's leading men, celebrated writers, wealthy socialites, and even, according to rumors, one of the most powerful and terrifying figures of the 20th century. It was said that Adolf Hitler himself was obsessed with her. On Christmas Day in 1936, she allegedly received a message from an unnamed German visitor delivering a request directly from Hitler. He wanted her to come home and lend her public support to his regime. Her response was immediate and absolute. She refused. And she did more than just refuse. She applied for American citizenship, and by 1939, she had formally given up her German nationality, making her stance unmistakably clear, long before many others were willing to take any kind of stand at all.
What made Dietrich remarkable during this period was that her resistance was not just symbolic. For years, she had been quietly raising money for Jewish dissidents and refugees fleeing persecution in Germany. When she earned a substantial salary from a 1937 film, she donated almost all of it, nearly $500,000, to support those in need. When World War II broke out, she went even further. She sold war bonds. She toured relentlessly to perform for Allied troops, traveling to locations just miles from active German front lines, putting herself in genuine danger to bring some comfort to the men fighting there. She was also recruited by the Office of Strategic Services, the predecessor to the CIA, to record messages in German aimed at enemy soldiers, designed to plant seeds of doubt and lower morale from within. Not everyone trusted her, though. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was deeply suspicious and believed she might secretly be a German spy. Under his orders, she was monitored closely, her movements tracked, and her personal mail opened and read. But when the war ended, any doubts about her loyalty were swept away. She was celebrated as a genuine hero of the Allied cause and awarded the prestigious United States Medal of Freedom, one of the highest honors a civilian could receive. Despite all of that recognition, her film career never quite returned to the heights of the early 1930s. A string of box office failures before the war had landed her on a notorious list of stars considered box office poison by Hollywood studios. She continued making films through the late 1940s, but the magic of her early stardom was difficult to recapture. Still, she adapted. From the 1950s through the 1970s, she reinvented herself as a cabaret and stage performer, commanding audiences in Las Vegas, Paris, and London with the same effortless authority she had always carried. In 1961, she returned to West Germany for the first time in decades to perform in Berlin. The reception was brutal. Protests broke out outside the venue. Critics accused her of abandoning her homeland. 2 separate bomb threats were made against the theater. She performed anyway, and when she later appeared in East Berlin, the response was completely different, warmer, almost welcoming, as if one half of the divided city understood what the other refused to. Through all of these years, the affairs continued. She carried on a decade-long relationship with actor Yul Brynner. She was romantically linked to George Bernard Shaw, Mike Todd, John Wayne, Kirk Douglas, and Frank Sinatra, among many others. Some of her most intense and enduring connections were with women, including Paris cabaret star Frédérique, writer Mercedes D'Acosta, and a quiet network of bisexual and lesbian figures she maintained in Hollywood that she called her sewing circle. And yet, through all of it, she remained married to Rudolf Sieber, a man she had not truly lived with as a conventional wife for most of their marriage. She even financially supported Rudolf and his longtime mistress, Tamara, going so far as to purchase them a ranch in California. But that delicate arrangement eventually crumbled. Tamara's mental health deteriorated over the years, and she was eventually committed to a psychiatric institution, where she was attacked and killed by another patient. It was a devastating loss for everyone involved, and marked the beginning of a much darker chapter in Dietrich's life. In the years that followed, she battled cervical cancer, and increasingly turned to alcohol and prescription pills to manage the pain, both physical and emotional. Then, in 1976, the blow that hit hardest. After 53 years of marriage, Rudolf Sieber died of cancer.
For all the unconventionality of their relationship, he had been her constant companion, the one person who had been there through almost everything. His death left a hole in her life that nothing could fill. She began to withdraw from public life almost entirely, living in near total seclusion in her Paris apartment for over a decade. When she finally passed away in 1992, at the age of 90 from kidney failure, it was the quiet end of a life that had once burned with an intensity that most people never come close to in their entire existence. She was buried in Berlin, the city where it had all started. And even in death, the revelations kept coming. Biographies emerged in the years after her passing, including one written by her own daughter, each uncovering parts of a life that had been kept carefully hidden. Among the most personal of those revelations was the story of her relationship with James Stewart during the filming of Destiny Rides Again in the late 1930s. What began as a passionate affair quickly became something far more complicated when Dietrich discovered she was pregnant. Believing she had no other choice given the circumstances of her life and career, she made the painful decision to end the pregnancy. Not long after filming Wrapped, Stewart walked away, leaving her to carry the emotional weight of that experience entirely on her own. She did what she had always done. She composed herself, tucked the pain somewhere no one could see it, and moved forward. And that, perhaps more than the glamour or the scandals or the awards, is what defined Marlene Dietrich. Underneath all of it was a woman making deeply human choices under impossible circumstances, carrying quiet heartbreaks that the world never got to see, and refusing, always refusing, to let any of it break her.